Welcome to the Alchemy of Success podcast with Dr. Michael Leslie, PhD, designed to inspire, educate, and empower listeners to embrace a life of abundance in all areas: mind, body, spirit, relationships, and finances. Let's get started.
Good evening and welcome to the Alchemy of Success. I'm Dr. Michael Leslie, and it's a pleasure to have you here for a stimulating discussion on relationships, the variety that they can take, the pros and cons of each one of those types or varieties, and also the possibilities that are open and available for people who are willing to experiment in their intimate relationships. This podcast offers you tools for creating the life that you want to live. And so tonight we have two special guests to talk about relationships. I'll allow in advance that there's three men here tonight talking about relationships, and there will definitely be an opportunity for women to talk about relationships too on one of our future podcasts. But tonight, here are our guests. Go ahead and roll the intro. Dan Nzinga is the founder and owner of the Inspiration Community, a networking and learning community for coaches and speakers, and the host of the Grace and Inspiration podcast. He enjoys guiding people to acquire new knowledge that can transform the way they live their lives. He says, "My greatest satisfaction is from using my skills, experience, and contacts to open the doors to personal and business success for others." Jason Wilson is a podcast producer, spiritual dream coach, and CEO of the Circle of Friends Club, an international health and wellness community. Jason helps coaches, authors, speakers, athletes, and entertainers showcase their products, books, events, and programs on their own branded live stream podcast shows. Great. So, our topic tonight is relationships, and in particular, intimate relationships. And I wanted to start off before we ask questions of our two distinguished guests with a brief recapitulation of the kinds of relationships that are available. So, there are monogamous relationships. These involve two individuals who are romantically or sexually exclusive to each other. Polyamorous relationships that involve multiple romantic partners with the knowledge and consent of everyone involved. Open relationships, a form of monogamy where partners agree to engage in sexual or romantic relationships with others outside of their primary relationship. And then in sexual relationships, we have casual sexual relationships, physical intimacy without emotional commitment, characterized by hookups and one night stands, friends with benefits, a relationship where friends engage in sexual activity without the expectation of a romantic attachment. And we have long term committed relationships, marriage or cohabitation. And finally, we have platonic intimate relationships with no sex involved, emotional intimacy, trust, and commitment, but without the sex. The chosen family, where relationships are based on like familial like bonds, with friends, offering support and connection akin to family relationships, but not blood family relationships. And then there are long distance relationships, intimate relationships, managed over large or at least geographical distances using the technology. Transactional relationships, interactions where intimacy is exchanged for compensation, encompassing emotional and physical aspects, but often defined by very specific boundaries. And I'll conclude with that. We have a few more, but I just wanted to open it up to the possibility that there are many more relationships and types that we've ever really visualized in our usual lives. So let's start off with a perspective on monogamy, and then I think we'll start off with that one with you, Jason Wilson. You're as you have some knowledge that many of us don't have because of the Christian background. And so we could start with that, and you could talk to us about monogamous uh, relationships, and then I would ask you, Dan, to follow up with a perspective on where my monogamous relationships might leave something out or leave something to desire. So go ahead, Jason.
Okay, personally, I have the perspective of a monogamous relationship. I mean, I've always been a one-on-one relationship type of person. That's me. But taking a look at this through the lens spiritually, from the very beginning, if we go to the Bible, in the book of Genesis, there's several references to God setting up the monogamous relationship with the man and the woman. So if we take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." So we're talking about a man and a woman that he created in the very beginning to be together, right? We're not talking about the man and two or three other chicks. I mean, we're talking about the man and the woman. So if we're taking a look at this from the biblical perspective, there's a reason why he did this. That couple that he set up in the very beginning, the whole purpose of it was that they had a mission to accomplish and to support each other with that mission. And so, when they have children, that child that they have is an embodiment of them as one flesh, as one person.
All right.
So that's why, I'm a proponent of this. But there's several other reasons why I believe that a monogamous relationship is best. Dan, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm a son of a pastor, and all my uncles, or most all my uncles, are pastors. I come from a very biblical family. Went to private Christian school. Went to a private university that was Christian. So was been taught a lot about that, about monogamy. But as I looked deeper into the Bible and started studying for myself, not necessarily what the pastors were teaching, but where I was trying to look to find certain answers, I started to see a lot of fuzziness. When I was growing up, it was clear, like God wants one man, one woman, and like the example Jason gave, as implying that because in the beginning it was Adam and Eve, or in the beginning they also didn't have homes. Does that mean that God doesn't want us to live in homes? Like, are we just going to take one aspect and say, "Oh, God created this is how we're supposed to live"? We have to look at it in a whole, in a big aspect, in a greater aspect. And maybe they're saying all you need is a man and a woman to reproduce a lot of people. That doesn't restrict that you can only have this type of relationship. So I guess the question was, what is missing? Monogamy doesn't, especially in developed countries, doesn't have a very good track record. As you know, the divorce rate is 50% or more. If I was to jump off an airplane, I have a 50% survival rate. I don't think that would be a good risk to take. So, and by saying this, too, I have been in monogamous relationships all my life, but I know that there might be other types of relationships, and there's a lot of things that are missing in monogamy, in my opinion.
Well, let's take that up then. So, we have a list. Those who advocate for monogamy say that it's the best condition that a man or a woman can live in together, but there have been criticisms of that perspective. So let's take that up. And we'll start off with you, Dan. What are the advantages or the disadvantages of the monogamous relationship?
So the disadvantages, I think, is that it's one-on-one, which means it's your word versus my word. So the idea of 50-50 doesn't really match up, because like you have a country with two people voting, there's only two votes. It's either only works if it's, 100-0, or, the 50-50 doesn't work, unless we agree. Right? If two of us are starting a business, it only works if we agree. If we're just in agreement and we can all just outvote each other, then there's always going to be a conflict. And people do compromise, but then one usually feels like, okay, I'm always compromising. The other person doesn't feel like you compromise because you love them. They feel like they feel like they compromise for you because they love you, but you don't feel that. You feel like they compromise because you're right. And so you have these people point taking system that happens in monogamous relationship where it usually ends up where one person feels the other one's ungrateful because I've done all this for you, and it's like you didn't do that for me, I did it for you, and there's like all these points, and there's no other people like to kind of people that are advising the relationship aren't in the relationship, so they don't know what's really happening in the relationship. They're not in love with the people that they're advising. Those that I'm talking about when you go outside of it. So there's always this conflict and if somebody's going to dominate the other. So, and it might as well for it to work. One has to be the leader, and the other one's the follower. If you have both of them are the leaders together, it only works if they agree. Once they disagree, there's going to go a couple times where they compromise. Eventually, be like, look, I'm going to do my thing, you do your thing, because we're not going to agree. And that's I think is one problem that I've experienced many times in my monogamous relationships.
And what would you say, Jason, are the disadvantages of a, I'm sorry, what would you say are the advantages of the monogamous relationship?
Well, I'm going to speak to Dan's point because what he said is really, really important. You know, when you have a one-on-one relationship, monogamous relationship, what you don't want to do is go to other family members and friends for advice on your relationship. You know, God is the author of relationships. So why not go to God in prayer and ask Him for the advice on your relationship, counsel on your relationship? You know, He's faithful to give you the right direction or path that you should take in your relationship through prayer and also through the Holy Spirit. He will give you that advice. So when you start to look at, other sources of advice on your relationship, that's where the conflict comes in my opinion.
Again, both people
Exactly.
have to agree, even on that point. Both people
That's
have to agree to go to God, and that God is talking, saying the same thing.
right. That's the point I wanted to insert. Suppose one couple, one partner in this couple, the monogamous couple, goes to God and gets one answer, and the other partner goes and gets a different answer. How do you resolve that, Jason?
Well, the thing is that you have to have agreement no matter what. So if you have your point of view, I have my point of view. At some point, you can voice your differences in a amicable way, but then at the end of the day, you have to agree on what it is that you've had conflict over, so that you can move forward in your relationship. And I think that the Holy Spirit will counsel you both on that point.
We we're losing you, Jason.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we lost the last part. You said the Holy Spirit would counsel you on.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit will counsel you both on that point, whatever it is that you had a disagreement about. And the Holy Spirit is just and faithful to give you the right counsel so that you can agree.
Okay, well,
If both of you are seeking the Lord.
right. Well, let's take this a little further and perhaps move it beyond a strictly religious context and talk about the benefits and the drawbacks, if you would, of having a relationship that's not monogamous. It's, for example, some people have talked about one of the disadvantages or threats to non-monogamous relationships is jealousy on the parts of the partners that are involved in it. Another often mentioned disadvantage is that the relative instability of the relationship compared to monogamous relationships. Now, I know that Dan has already put forth, well, these so-called stable monogamous relationships only have a 50-50 chance of succeeding anyway. So where's the instability? But I think we would want to talk about, as I said, without reference to a foundational text, the Bible, talk about it in terms of the societal and personal implications of having more than one partner. Maybe you can pick that up, Dan. I'm sorry, pick that up, Jason, and then we'll go to Dan.
Again, I'm going to speak about this spiritually speaking. We were created as spirits, in the very beginning. So when you have a sexual relationship with a person, it's not just you having a physical relationship, it's a spiritual interchange of the spiritual essence of ourselves. And not only that, though, some people may be under the influence of demonic spirits. And so there's no protection that you can use physically to protect yourself from a demonic influence from whatever it is that that person is dealing with. It could be a spirit of jealousy. You mentioned that earlier. How do you protect yourself physically from a spirit of jealousy? It's impossible. Can't do that. So, that spirit of jealousy, though, there's several manifestations of that spirit. One of them is murder in the worst case scenario. So, you don't want to be in a relationship where, let's say that you've been unfaithful or you're committing adultery in a polyamorous relationship, and one of those ladies or men has a spirit of jealousy operating through them. And God forbid, there's a case where that person takes out their jealousy on that person. I mean, we've seen this several times in several stories where couples have killed each other and stuff like that. So that's the worst case scenario of something bad that could happen. But this is a very real situation.
I agree that these situations happen, and they mainly happen in monogamous relationships. Spirit of jealousy is like the spirit. You could get that with one person or with another, but most of the times where the jealousy is happening is when there's an agreement to a monogamous relationship, and somebody doesn't keep that relationship and doesn't keep that agreement, and then the jealousy comes up. These kind of things do not happen frequently that I know of, and like an agreed polygamous relationship. There's not, and even if the man did step out, I think there would be like they're kind of like more of understanding or forgiveness. So my point is, yeah, you don't want to be with somebody that has a bad spirit, but that could be true with. That's not inclusive to like that's true for anything, whether you're on a monogamous, polygamous, or any relationship. It's the same thing. If you say, well, there's a vetting process, monogamy, well, there can also be a vetting process and any other type of relationship. So I think that what Jason's saying would be more of a argument for not having a monogamous relationship because all these spirits can come up and happen without, at any moment. So it's better to have an agreement that's going to avoid that. I would say, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this, and it's a bit of going back historically a bit on this debate. We know that in previous times there were tolerated, both in the Christian tradition, I'm sorry, in the Jewish tradition, and also in the Buddhist tradition, the Muslim tradition, in Islam, even recently in the Church of Christ, of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm wondering, what is it that has made uh, being being non-monogamous such a point of contention in contemporary society compared to what it was in the past, where there's a relatively high tolerance for that? Perhaps you could speak to that, Dan.
Yeah, so I'm happy you mentioned that. So in the Bible, a lot of Abraham, Lamech, Jacob, Isaac, King David, Solomon, and more were people who had multiple wives. Even I think, yeah, many guys had multiple wives, and actually the Judaist religion is actually straight out of monogamous families. Jacob and all these guys. These are what God chose. These are the people God chose to start the religion with. And so, if God was against it, or looked down upon it, I don't think that He would use these men as His example. Solomon being the wisest man in the world, King David, we know that what he prayed. Abraham is the father of the religion. So that to me would be indication that there's no problem with it. Why I think, and I don't want to go too long, but it's became more. It's like not permissive because when division of land in Europe, in old Europe, in the 14th centuries or whatever, whenever it started, it was harder to when the man died to divide the land between the kids, and so it's just easier government wise to just have one wife and you have one kid, so that it's not a big problem when you're dividing the heritage. And so then it just became this is the best way, and over time that's the education. But I don't think it's a spiritual or biblical restriction at all, because God is wise enough to pull people from polygamous families to build his whole religion off of.
Jason?
Well, he didn't prohibit it, right? But every time that we saw this, if you go all the way back to Genesis with the story of Sarah and Hagar, Sarah was Abraham's wife, and then Hagar was another lady that was like a handmaid of Sarah. And so, God never told Abraham to have a child outside of his marriage, but thinking that it wasn't possible that God would allow him and his wife to have a child, he went to Hagar to pretty much help God out to have that child. And as a result of this, there was conflict between Sarah and Hagar. And in every instance after that, if you take a look at the situation where the guy had maybe two wives, there was conflict between the wife and the other lady. So there were several instances like that. So God, again, he didn't prohibit the men to do this, but he did tell Solomon, though, don't take on too many wives because you can be led away from me and follow other gods, follow other idols, which is exactly what happened to him. And as a result, there was several instances of conflict with him and running the country and everything else. So um, again, I don't think it's something that God would um, bless you with necessarily, because he knows that somewhere along the line there's going to be some kind of conflict.
So
Well,
is conflict a result? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to
go
ask
ahead.
if
Go ahead.
conflict is evidence of something that is prohibited or not good, because there's many places in the Bible where it says be ready for conflict through the race. So I don't know if conflict necessarily is that way, but saying, hey, you don't have too many wives is an indication I can have more than one, and just don't have too many, because if I just say, hey, just have one. So if God told Solomon don't have too many wives, and he had I think 700 wives and 300 concubines, that might be too many, but maybe five is not too many, maybe three, maybe two is not too many. I don't know, but definitely the Bible doesn't say that, and there's verses where I would say God does bless. God is instructing you. He's giving you instructions on how to manage and if you want, I can share the verses here where God is teaching us how to deal with a polygamous relationship. I can share the verse if anybody's interested.
Well, we can come back to the verses again. I'm interested in this particular dialogue of talking about this in a larger framework than just a religious framework. So, because I think we have to examine what actually takes place in the world and perhaps give some counsel to ourselves and others on what might be more desirable as a lifestyle in terms of relationships based on the results that it produces, based on the experiences. So I'm reminded of, I spent some time in living in Cameroon, which is in, for those of you who don't know Africa very well, is in West Africa. And I happened to meet a woman who her father was a polygamist and had several wives, and we had a conversation. And she pointed out a couple of things to me. One of them was that there was more help available in her household, that the mother didn't have to do all of the work, that the other wives, I think this particular person, her father had three wives, so they shared the burden of the housework amongst them. The same thing applied to childbearing, because, well, larger families are prized in some places in Africa because there's a high rate of mortality in families. So you have to have more children because not so many are going to survive. But one woman doesn't have to bear 11 children, right? Which has happened in many or large families, which are quite burdensome on a woman's body, not to mention on her health, right? And then the third thing that she mentioned is that because she had three mothers living in the household, that she had a variety of people to draw upon for life experiences, for teaching her about the diversity that life offers and the challenges that it has. So it was clear to me from the conversation that she didn't think, and her experience, that it was a liability, that she thought it was actually an asset, that she had grown up in a polygamous family. And to cap this off, there was a question about this jealousy. So, and I asked her about that, and she said her response was very interesting. She said her father, each one of the women, had her own house, and so she had her own money, her own house, and the husband rotated equal time amongst the three houses. So it's a compound, and each one has her own living quarters and her children and so on. And there was even a law, or I suppose a norm, that the husband could not spend more time with one wife than the other wife because that would lead to jealousy. That's what she said, right? So it seemed to me that there was a way of managing this so the jealousy issue wasn't prominent, that there were benefits for the women who were involved in that relationship, both financial and also, of course, from a physiological point of view, and that there was some diversity of experience that the child or people in that group would have compared to just two people being their parents. So, with that as a context, what are some of we just talked about the disadvantages. Would you speak to some of the advantages that might accrue from the non monogamous relationship? And I invite both of you to speak to me from a perspective of, could it be that what I was shared with me and what we've been talking about, that there are other possibilities that could work?
So I can speak on that. Well, first of all, I want to say that even in a monogamous relationship, we can create a situation where you have a lot of people to pull from. So like, so it maybe not be as intimate as your friend, but not to like say, I don't think monogamy is bad for everybody. There's just other options, and somebody can create a situation where they have other people to pull from. What the advantage I see, and other advantage also in having this polygamous relationship, is that there's a lot of more qualities inside of it. Everyone's bringing their different strengths, not just for teaching purpose, but actually for doing purpose. Someone's a better cook, the other person's better at negotiating for business, another person. So you have all these great qualities. Someone's really good at tech, and they can do stuff better. So you have all these qualities that are right there. You don't have to go see outside, and then somebody owes you. And I feel like the communication is definitely needed, and more because there's more transparency. So there's more eyes. I think there's less cheating in the relationship because there's more people that you'll be cheating on, and there's more people to be, there's more people to be mad at to have to get to the point where you want to cheat. If you're in this four people in the relationship, you have to be pissed off at all of them in a way to sneak out on the whole team. And that really it's easier to get mad at one person and do that. So I think there's just less messiness and all country. I think people who are monogamous that are living polygamous, that's where the mess happens. When you're saying you're monogamous, but then you got all these other girlfriends on the side, and you're living as a polygamous person, but it's in secret, and you're lying and you're manipulating all that stuff. Then it gets all messy. But the way that you explained it, the guy in Cameroon, everything was in order, everything was official, there was transparency, and everything was living happily. I'm not surprised at those results.
Jason?
Speaking to the point that there are advantages. Okay, like Dan said, there's the possibility that you can share responsibilities of the house, so that one person isn't so burdened down with the responsibilities. That's a plus. And With the childbearing, I'm not so sure if that would work, man. Like in the States or any place else, or here in South America where I'm living at, I don't know, man. In Africa, yeah, that's perfectly acceptable in that culture. But in the culture here or in the States, I don't know.
Mhm. Well, I was asking about not I'm not sure where maybe I should ask you to clarify. So it was about not having one woman burdened with having to bear multiple children, right? Progeny, if you would, carrying on the line, that you have several women who can carry that burden or can perform that function. So that's what I was asking you. Do you think that that is a reasonable, uh, not a reasonable, but if that's something worth having as a result of being in a polygamous relationship?
I, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but as far as sharing the responsibilities, like if you have a family business, let's say, and there's several functions of that business that would work better as a team, and why not uh, delegate some of that responsibility to your wives instead of going outside the family? I can see that,
Okay.
but I don't know about the rest of it.
That's fine. Let's move to another aspect of this, and there's a question that always comes up, I think, for people and who are urged not to involve themselves in fornication, which is, I think, sex outside of marriage as it's currently defined, and also the business of adultery, right? So, and which is to have sex with someone other than your wife. Now, I think that Dan has made clear that when if you have three wives, then they're all your wives, so you're not actually committing adultery, right? That's the fine point on that. But this business of the celibacy and not having relationships when unless you're married. I'd like you guys to weigh in on that too, and here's why. I the people are often asked, young people in particular, but sometimes older people, are asked to remain not to abstain, uh, given the kinds of drives that young people have, physiological drives, which come with their biological nature to have sex, and that it would seems it would result in many people not being able to keep that promise, maybe even feeling guilty about not keeping the promise because someone would tell them that, well, you're not doing what, in some cases, one would say God has ordained, that you're having sex outside of marriage and you shouldn't do that because God says you shouldn't do that, right? But people have this drive to do that. So this is the question here is about celibacy, how, in your view, that works or doesn't work, and what is the counsel that you can give to people who are not married, who are not in a relationship, but who still have sexual needs? You can start with that one if you would, Jason.
So, on this point, the benefits of that would be that if you're getting to know this person, um, it's best if you abstain so that you can really, really focus on the quality of life that you want to have as a couple beyond the marriage, and focusing on one another's goals and what you expect from each other, and all the expectations that you have from each other in that relationship. I think that in a lot of cases, when people jump directly into a sexual relationship, that's pretty much foregone. Like you don't have that kind of focus on your relationship if it's strictly a sexual thing. So I think it really depends on what kind of quality relationship that you want to have with that person. Is marriage the goal? If that's the case, then I think that abstaining and focusing on developing that relationship in other ways is really the best way to go.
Well, I'd like to follow on that because you mentioned something at the very end. So, suppose you're in a relationship, but marriage is not the goal. So what is your counsel, or what is your philosophy around celibacy in those kinds of relationships where marriage is not the goal?
I guess it just depends on what kind of relationship you want to have with that person. Is it just a friendship or platonic relationship? Um, it just depends on what kind of relationship we're talking about.
All right, go ahead, Dan. Again, refocusing the question: celibacy, abstinence in for people who are not necessarily in a relationship at the current time.
Okay, so I think Jason said something kind of like it would kind of imply like if you have sex first, then you're not going to be focused enough to focus on these other things, which is possible because I've had that. You know, my first wife, we had sex quickly, and then we were able to focus on other qualities and eventually get married and have many years and have have a family together. So it's possible in that sense. But growing up in the church, all my life I've heard don't have sex before marriage. I knew everyone knows that's a fact. Don't have sex before marriage. All school, everything. And when I was 30 years old, somebody was telling, I was having a debate with somebody, and I went to look it up, and I couldn't find in the Bible where it actually said that. And I stayed up all night researching, calling people, and I was flabbergasted on like the fact that it wasn't literally like clearly white on the right, like clearly black on white. This is not what's supposed to happen. And actually, in that research, the word fornication comes from the Greek word porneia, which porneia is a form of worship that. So in the temples, in the pagan temples, people used to come and have sex with prostitutes that were there for that. That's how the temple used to raise money. They would have, as a form of worship, they would have sex with these goddess women or these spiritual women, whatever, and they'd pay the church. And it was a type of prostitution in a way. And Paul was saying, don't practice this type of prostitution, which is porneia, which came with fornication. And I read that. I mean, later on, trying to look that up, it was hard to find that information again. So I don't know if it's like not there, but most people know fornication. They say, well, it's sex outside of marriage. But in the roots of it, it doesn't say that, and the Bible doesn't define it as that. The Bible doesn't say fornication is having sex outside of marriage. Actually, the term premarital sex is not even in the Bible. So it talks about adultery is when you're married and you cheat. But two single people having sex is not clearly. The Bible clearly says, don't lay with your mom or don't lay with your sister. Two men don't lay together. Two women don't lay. The Bible clearly says all that, but I don't see where it clearly says two single people that are unmarried can't have sex together. And I actually was part of a church when I was getting married, and I went to the pastor. I said, "Hey, if I'm living in sin, let me know. Show me the verse." And he's like, "Okay, I'll get back to you." I'm like, "This guy's a pastor of all these thousands of people. He doesn't know where the verse is." And then I'll give you your email. And next time I saw him again, "Hey, where's the verse?" And he kept on until he just avoided me all completely and never gave me an answer. And I was like, "Okay, this is crazy that I don't see it clearly. That's in the Bible." So we're assuming now that it is wrong. But where in the Bible does it say two single people can't have sex together, or you have to be married a virgin? It doesn't necessarily say that in the Bible, or I would challenge you.
Yeah, that's
Jason.
true. That's true. What you say is true, Dan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So I
So,
guess it's okay then. So I guess the question for Jason is like, is it? I mean, for Michael, but the question that he asked was like, is it okay for me? I think I don't see anything wrong with it. The Bible doesn't restrict it clearly. Then it's okay. It's up to us, unless further notice.
You have to make the decision. Yes.
all
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So very good. So then we could talk about the uh, advantages of having premarital sex. Sometimes it's demonized, if you would. So I would imagine that if you mentioned, Jason, something about you want to get to know the person before you marry them, and I suppose one way of getting to know a person also is through sexual intercourse, right? And that's another way of getting to know someone. So let's if there is a disadvantage to premarital sex, since it's now you both acknowledge that this is not something that's proscribed by the scripture. then what would that disadvantage be?
You mean advantage?
Advantage or disadvantage?
We could speak to both advantages and disadvantages. So, Jason, I imagine I don't want to put you in this box, Jason, but I would like you to what would be the disadvantages, and then maybe Jason could speak to the advantages. How I mean, Dan could speak to the advantages. How about that? Shall we go that way?
All right. Well, I pretty much touched on that at the beginning of the conversation. The spiritual aspect of it is that okay, there's plenty of venereal diseases out there, right? That's one consequence of having premarital sex. You don't know this person, and you don't know who they've been with. So there's a high risk that you can contract one of these diseases. That's one thing. But then that's the physical. So the spiritual, again, is you're not exactly sure of what kind of spiritual um, beliefs they have, what kind of practices they have. So you can be at risk of being influenced by demonic spirits, which it affects everything. It affects your mental health, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. These things you can open yourself up to these kinds of influences through premarital sex with somebody unknowingly. So that's a danger of it.
I would say that you can still open yourself up to that even if you have sex with them after marriage, because they can still have all these same things. I don't think that the demons necessarily go away right away, and you don't have to have sex on the first night. You could wait or get to know, like, the same process you do in marriage. Because if I marry somebody quick, my first wife, I married her after one date. 10 days we got married, and then we got blessed and everything. So I hadn't gotten in a fight with her for months after we got married to see the demonic, stuff that came out of that. So for me, it can happen on both sides. So the advantage of waiting to have sex is maybe you can just really see if the relationship is based on something else. The disadvantage of waiting is that after you get married, you realize that you're not sexually compatible, and the person doesn't even like sex, or doesn't do a bunch of stuff they don't want to do, and now you're not really having fun, and you keep imagining what sex would be like if this person was more open. I was fortunate enough in my life to have many sexual partners, to know that they're not all the same, and they're not all willing to do the same thing, and all not willing to have fun the same, and everyone's not compatible. And I don't even perform the same with everybody. So I'm not even the same with everybody. So there's all of that. And it would kind of suck to get married to somebody for life, and then you're realizing that you're not. And that's actually happened with my first wife. It's like things that I wish you told me before, and now we're already married. And now I'm discovering that you don't like X, Y, and Z. And now it's like it makes you feel bad or whatever. It's like, oh man, now I gotta.
Okay, but see, that brings me back to my point of getting to know that person, like in the dating stages of that relationship. If you have plenty of conversation and you ask the right questions, you can find out a lot of this information before the marriage. Things that they
Yeah,
like, things that they don't like, you can find that out in conversation, right?
yeah, but they might say at a certain level, like, yeah, I like it, but they're not gonna. It's when you get on the court, you experience the game. Versus, you'll be like, oh, I like this, I like that. And some women are not gonna be like, oh, I'm a lady, I don't talk about that. Like, not everybody woman wants to discuss their sexual experience, because they don't even know. Because, like, what they experience with one man, they might not want to experience it with you. And especially if she's a virgin, she can't tell you what she likes, what she doesn't like. If she only had one partner, that might, So I think women don't. I would say men, people don't know what they like, and people change. So saying that I'm gonna get time to know you and all that stuff is great. It's true, and it lessens the chance. But people change after 5 years. They're a totally different person. They might like one thing, and then all of a sudden they say, I don't want to do that anymore. And so you're still back in the same predicament that if you married them fast. So I don't see. I was a virgin for a long time. I went to college. I was 22 years old. I was waiting for marriage to get. I remember my coach saying, "I wouldn't wait if I were you. You'd be missing. You're missing out." I'm like, "I'm gonna wait till I get married." I had this girlfriend for 3 years, and we didn't do anything. We were waiting to get married, and then when I lost my virginity, it was like, yeah, I guess I don't feel bad. I feel good that I waited that long, but at the end of the day, it came down to the same results. It's still like, okay, then I started having sex with a bunch of other people, and yeah, that's my that's my experience. That doesn't waiting that long didn't make me better at anything. It didn't even make me better choosing my wife. Like it didn't. I didn't see the advantage of waiting that long. But going too fast, I can see could ruin your life. It helped me to stay focused on my dreams. I was a basketball player, so I got to go further because I wasn't distracted by sex so much. But I definitely was still flirting with girls and dating, but I just didn't have sex with them. So yeah, I guess the advantage is that you can stay focused on other things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's very true.
Right. So we've covered pretty much both sides of the, I would say, the opposite sides of the spectrum. I think to bring this to a close, maybe we should talk about what's in the middle. So that includes, you've got a lot of noise going on there in the background. Um, that includes relationships that are not sexual, right? So I think we could we one could imagine that with one could live with someone from the opposite sex without having sex, right? And some people actually not just don't live with someone of the opposite sex; they live alone, right? So, um, and there's some scriptures about, as I recall, I'm not the expert that you guys are, but I can recall one of the scriptures that says, man, I suppose in today we would say people should not live alone, right? But is it do you see advantages to having a life of, we talked about celibacy, but I would say a life of not being sexual with another human being? What is your view on that? If you had experience with that, I think we would appreciate your sharing that with us. We can start with you, Jason, and then we'll go to Dan.
I've had several periods over my life where, I've been completely isolated by myself. And I mean, I'm talking about um, 3 to 6 months by myself. And during that time, though, I had a lot of time to spend with God in prayer. And I received a lot of ideas, concepts, and things that He wanted me to do. I honestly can say that I don't think that would have occurred had I been distracted with a relationship during those periods of time. So it does afford you the huge advantage of really, really being close to God.
Dan?
So I think that a lot of men in America are living that. Married people are living that situation where they are married, went through stretch, and their wives are no longer interested in having sex with them, and they don't want to beg. They're tired of begging, and so that's a common problem. Is a common frustration, and I don't think that's right or that's a good experience of a man to feel rejected all the time, and then they go years. Some married people go years without having sex with each other, just buddies. And but if he would ever even look at another woman, he'd be in trouble. It's like you're blocking him from having sex, but you don't want him to have sex with anybody else because it hurts your feelings. I'm talking as far as the women, so they just want, and sometimes the woman loses her confidence as she gets older and she's not as beautiful, and then so she keeps the shirt on when she has sex, and the next thing keeps the pants on, so you're not getting any. And then later, she's sleeping with all her clothes on, and the guy never sees his wife naked anymore. That happens a lot, and I don't think it's good. I don't think it's healthy, and I wouldn't wish that on any man because I've had those periods when I was married, and your wife's not interested in having sex with you anymore, and it's sad.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
And what I hear well, we talked about two aspects of this, so let's go into that a little more deeply. So one is when you're with someone, well, if you're married to someone, as you put it, Dan, and and she's not interested or he's not interested. So there's some suffering involved in that kind of situation. But I was thinking about not actually being in a relationship with someone and choosing not to be in a relationship with someone so that you can have what Jason referred to as time to grow, perhaps time to be closer to God. It's kind of in the ballpark of people who fast, right? They decide they're not going to eat for a day, a week, a month, a year, in order to explore or to expand some other part of themselves. So my question was, you both mentioned, Jason mentioned some experience with that. Dan, if you had experience with that as a voluntary decision that you made to be celibate.
I have, yeah. I've, when I, a couple years ago, when I came to Columbia, and I need to focus. I said, okay, I'm gonna do 6 months. I said I'm gonna do 6 months and focus on this transformational program, and I want to transform myself. Now I didn't make it to 6 months. After 8 days, I felt really lonely. I was like, man, can I do 6 months with this? Now I didn't have sex after 8 days, but I started talking to people, talking to women to start at least I get the energy or something. But I was feeling very lonely, and I probably did like 3 months or something before I broke the fast. But I have done that, waking up early, working out, and just staying. I'm going to say focused on that. But there's just something naturally in us biologically that wants to have sex, and I didn't see, it's good to deny yourself sometimes to build discipline. I don't know, for a long period of time. And if you offered me $1 billion to never have sex again in my life, I would throw the $1 billion in your face and say no, thank you. I don't. I think that's kind of the highest physical reward, at least. That's like the trophy of having a woman. That's yours, that you have. So I think sex is important, and I think it's good to deny yourself that, just like you deny yourself chocolate and cake and stuff like that for a while to get in shape. But it's good to have some too.
Hmm. Well, and what about, we've been talking about women as being important. What about masturbation as a alternative to having a woman in your life and beginning to create that space for perhaps for the ideal woman to show up over some period of time that you've practiced masturbation instead of having sex with a woman?
I'll let Jason answer
Well, I gotta answer
that.
it.
I've been talking a lot, but no, but I don't think the masturbation is ever going to be as good as the real thing. I think
Yeah.
in that you're still imagining the trophy. You're like waiting for your wife to come. So at the end of the day, I don't think that masturbation is really something to be proud of. I guess it's something to go over. But I would say, if you're gonna, when I was saying I'm not gonna have sex, I was masturbating is cheating, because then you have to like just hold yourself strong and put that energy into something else. If you're putting the energy out anyways, then I feel like you're not getting the benefits of fasting, and that type of fast is you're supposed to put that in. You feel that energy and you put it toward your work, or you put it towards somewhere else, and that's where the benefits. So I think masturbating to me is kind of just almost same as having sex, a lower version of sex. It's like it's safer, but I don't think it's necessarily spiritually better. I don't know. I don't know what Jason thinks about it.
Yeah, let's say if you're on a fast, just like you said, Dan, I think the whole point of it is self denial. Whether it be food, sex, or anything else that you normally like to indulge in, you sacrifice that to God, and in return, you experience tremendous blessing because of that. At least that's been my experience. So. Um, it's not exactly a replacement for a woman. It's not a replacement, right? And God created sex for us to be enjoyed with a woman, or if you're a woman with a man, I mean, vice versa, right? So I think in a long-term relationship, the sex is something that's very, very important because it is something for both of you to enjoy. And I think that that helps to strengthen your relationship as well. Like you said, Dan, a married couple with no sex in it, I think that's. I mean, what is that? To me, it's a death sentence. You know what I mean?
But I do think that if a man who has a mission, he's focused, he said, I'm not going to have sex until I get my goal. I'm not, the energy he's putting towards sex. Men put a lot of energy, seeking sex, getting dressed and going out and talking, going on dates. I mean, you spend a lot of energy and time. If you put that time towards something productive, I do think you'd be a little bit more productive than somebody else. You might be a little bit more sexually frustrated at the end, but you definitely would get your goal. I think that I would definitely accomplish more if I couldn't have sex at all and I would just strictly focus on one thing. I think sex can be a distraction, but sometimes we need a distraction because there's a lot of stress. We got to release some stress, feel loved as well. You got to feel loved and feel affection, and everybody likes to feel friendship and all that stuff too. If you eliminate all that stuff, I'm sure you get a lot more done if you eliminate a whole bunch of things. But what kind of life is that if it's just all brick and mortar and no sugar and spice and no you gotta live life and have fun too.
I agree with that.
All right, so I'm going to give each one of you a minute to summarize your views on polygamous versus, I'm sorry, monogamous versus non-monogamous relationships, and I give you we 1 minute each, the main view of why it's advantageous, and I guess I would ask you to take that position, Jason, and why it's disadvantageous uh, to restrict oneself or to monogamous relationships only. So why don't you take 1 minute, Jason, and then we'll give you 1 minute, Dan, and we'll close out our show tonight.
Okay. A man like myself, past 30, a man who is basically focused on legacy now and building the future to hand down to his family. You want to be in a monogamous relationship. I think you need to have that as a goal so that you can have kids and be in a committed relationship to give the correct values to your kids. Your kids are paying attention to everything that you do as they're growing up. So that's a lot of advantage when it comes to kids and your vision for the future. It's a lot healthier to be in a monogamous relationship, especially when you don't have to be concerned about this person cheating and having relationships outside of your marriage, possibly contracting some kind of disease, or even worse, being affected by some kind of demonic spirit. I think that you have the opportunity to grow as a couple, spiritually, physically, and in every sense. So to me, there's a lot of advantages to it.
Thank you, Jason. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, so I haven't studied all types of relationship, and there's some that I don't totally experience understand, like an open relationship. I don't really know, but I know people that are in it. I would say you have to do what's going to work for you. You could be in a monogamous relationship like I have been, and it doesn't work. Your wife doesn't support you. All the stuff you're talking about, Jason, your wife could be the one that destroys all of that for you. And when you married her, she could have been the right person, and then she watched a movie and changed her mind, and changed her whole perspective. Somebody talked to her. You might watch a movie and change your mind and perspective, and then now you guys are no longer equally yoked, and now you're kind of in this jail cell a little bit, and now you can't get out of it. So things can go wrong in a lot of stuff. Being in a monogamous relationship is not a guarantee that's going to focus. There's going to be problems anyways. You got to go to counseling, all this stuff. We know the success rate isn't that great for monogamous relationships anyways, but I would say if that was works for the person and what makes you feel good, then you should do that. I wouldn't encourage a woman to get into polygamy if it makes her feel bad and she can't get over the education she's had and she knows her family's going to judge her or whatever, or the same with the man, so but I think that in all honesty, you have one life to live and you got to do what's best for you. Are you going to be unhappy for society? Or are you going to do what's the relationship that makes you happy and helps you with your goals? Because I don't definitely feel like four people can accomplish more than than two people. So if Jason has, his one wife and he's building his legacy and he's building his business, and I have three wives and I'm building my business, and we're all on the same page, we don't have to worry about cheating and all that stuff. Just like in monogamy, they don't. I mean, they do, and both people have to worry about the same thing. But I just feel like we can accomplish more. So my final, my last seconds is, I feel like if a man is up to something big in life, and he needs more support, he's that, I would definitely like consider and look at it, because there's a lot of advantages when you have one wife and you're up to a lot. There's a lot of divorce because you're busy in your thing and your wife wants your attention, unless she's with you in the trenches, and that's not always the case. She's there taking care of kids. But if you're in a polygamous relationship and there's other people, she's not alone left while you're out chasing your dream. She's with another friend, and you can have somebody with you. Like, you literally can have somebody with you at all times, and nobody has to be alone ever. Even when you fight with each other, nobody has to be alone. Two people get in a fight, and you can still be with somebody else and pleading your case and explaining and venting. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, to that. And even with building your legacy, the only issue is like it's not socially acceptable, so people can criticize you. I'm definitely sometimes have fear of judgment of people saying, "Oh, So I don't really talk about my personal relationship. I think it's a distraction from my goal as well, from talking about it. But at the end of the day, am I going to live an unhappy life just for other people? I can maybe live a private life for other people, but am I going to live unhappy? I don't think I'm willing to do that anymore, because the people that are criticizing me are just as unhappy as I was. They just want me to be as miserable as they are, and so I'm like, nah. And so that's my. I think anybody should do whatever relationship works for them. Try things out, and there's all types of relationship, and it's not just gonna be perfect all the time. That's it.
Well, my thanks to both of you, Dan Nzinga of Dreamwork and Jason Wilson of the Circle of Friends. Thank you for this enlightening conversation. And I look forward to seeing you again, all of you who are watching this program, on the next episode of The Alchemy of Success, where you get the tools to live the life of your dreams. I'm Dr. Michael Leslie. Good night.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Alchemy of Success podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.